to the Cripple Chronicles, a podcast about ilizarov frames, amputation, and the journey to accepting and embracing disability, which I myself am still very much learning. So I'm hoping this is a way that I can learn some more. My name is Becca and I am your host. I was in a pretty bad car accident at the end of 2019 where I broke my collarbone and both of my legs, resulting in an ilizarov frame from my hip down to my ankle. I tried this method for 2.5 years, which unfortunately resulted in me having my right leg amputated above the knee in August 2022. Recovery has been hard, to say the least. There has been some very, very dark times, sometimes that were hard for me to get through, but there has also been things that I overcame and I did that I never thought I would be able to do with the frame on. There are still things that even now I thought that I would never ever do them again. And there has been a lot of growth, figuratively and literally speaking, but we'll get to that later on, since this is the introduction. Each week I am going to be sharing my experience from my accident through to where I am now, as well as what life is like as a fairly new amputee and how I am finding things in the world which isn't really built for disabled people. I am also planning on involving you lovely people that are listening, or if you are like me and you prefer to watch podcasts on YouTube, that is also an option. I have set up an email address which is cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com, where you can write in what you think, what your experiences are. It would just be lovely to hear from people. I'm also on Instagram over at Cripple Chronicles Pod, where I will be posting stories, asking for your input, maybe some polls. Not really sure, but you can also, if there's anything that I say that you have a question about, drop me an email or message me over on Instagram and I will try and get back to you. But I really hope that this will be a way of sharing experience, strength and hope of how to get through whatever you are going through. And I hope later down the line, when I have got more adjusted to recording video and audio and I can get another mic, I will probably have some guests on to speak about different things, maybe people who were there when I was going through the accident and what their kind of view is and things like that. I want to preface, before I get into the main section of the first episode, everything I am sharing is my own experience. That is not universal. I think it really helps to hear a variation of people's different experiences, and it helps us kind of empathise more with people in the world. But my goal is to talk about my experience with the ilizarov frame and what I've been through, but also to try and do it in a way that doesn't invoke anxiety. Because I know when I first found out that I was getting a frame, I didn't really know what it was. I couldn't really find a lot of information, and I just thought that having something that you can see and you can hear and you can interact with, it is a lot less anxiety inducing than, say, reading a blog post, which I have also tried to do. I did initially find a blog post when I was first looking for information and some medical journals and stuff, but other than that, it didn't give me a lot of different views, and I really struggled until I found a very good support group, which I think initially that made me feel really anxious because I saw things that were going wrong. And if you are listening to this and that you're at the start of your journey and you hear my story and it makes you worry that this is going to happen to you, this was a very rare case. There are loads of people who have frames and they come off and they live their life as if nothing happened. So please don't take this one experience as something that is going to happen to you. But like I said, if there is anything that does worry you, any questions that you've got, any things that you think would be good to hear me speak about, please get in contact at cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com or over on Instagram at cripplecchroniclespod. One of the great things about human beings is that we are all different. We all heal differently. Some people find things harder than others. Some people find them easier. This is just my own experience, and your healing journey will be unique to you, but there are always little hints and tips and experience that we can learn along the way to make things easier. Whatever is going on, you aren't doing it alone. So, since this is episode 1, I'm going to share the recollection of what happened during my accident and being fitted with my first ilizarov frame, and some of information on what an ilizarov frame even is for the people of you listening that don't know. I'm going to try and go in chronological order. I have bullet points on my laptop to try and keep me focused, but my brain likes to get sidetracked every now and then, so if I go off on a wee tangent, I will bring it back to what I'm speaking about. Just bear with me, that's all part of the experience, isn't it? So, rewind to the 12th of December 2019. My ex had stayed with me and we woke up in the morning and he was running late for work. So I offered to give him a lift because I loved driving and I still do love driving. I'm in the process of actually getting back to driving. And a few weeks ago, I was in the car for the first time in 3 years and it didn't feel as if it had been that long. I loved it so much. So I really didn't mind taking him. So he got organised and we left. Where I was staying, there was 2 roads that you could take out, and I took the back road out, which is the road that I normally take. However, we were going along the road and we hit some roadworks, which was a bit of a annoyance. But then my ex had realised that he had forgot his phone, so I turned back and went to the house so that he could go and grab it. And because the car was now facing the direction of the other road and I couldn't be bothered with the roadworks, I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to go this direction, which is fine. The one thing is, I don't really like the other road, and it is quite, I was going to say popular for accidents. I'm not really sure popular is the right word you should use in the context of an accident, but the other word is totally escaping my brain right now, so that's what we're going to go with. There is a lot of accidents on that road. I never really liked being a passenger in the car going over it, but it wasn't something that I would go out of my way to avoid. This also wasn't the first accident that I had been in. I had been in quite a few bumps and scrapes when I was a child, and because of that, I always said that within my first year of driving, I would be in an accident, and I just never quite expected it to be like it was. So as you're leaving the town that I was staying in, it goes from a 30 mph zone to national speed limit. I remember only doing about 40 mile an hour, and I took the corner, and next thing I know, I am coming round from being blacked out. And the first thing I did was look to my side and realised my ex wasn't in the car, and I just started screaming. At this point, I did not know that I had just hit black ice and went into an oncoming car. And also, I was sitting there with 2 broken legs and a broken collarbone. But at this point, I was just thinking, oh my God, he's not in the passenger side. I'm such an idiot. My dad is going to be so annoyed that I've crashed my car. Oh my God. There was some lovely people who had stopped, phoned emergency services. One guy actually got in my car with me, and I can't really remember what we were chatting about, but it helped to calm me down. And then I also remember there was a woman who was at the driver's side window chatting to me, just kind of trying to keep me occupied. And I remember her saying that she was going Christmas shopping with her daughter, and I just started crying again because I was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I've ruined your day by crashing my car. The paramedic approached me and told me that because, well, he didn't exactly tell me, he said that because I had an open brake, I would have to be cut out of the car. That was kind of the moment that I realised I was a wee bit fucked. So the fire services came to start cutting me out of the car. They had got in touch with an air ambulance for me to be airlifted to hospital. And whilst this was happening, the other medics that were at the scene were dealing with my ex and the passengers of the other car that I had gone into. And my ex was very, very lucky. I think he had dropped his phone or something like that, and he had taken his seatbelt off literally just before we crashed. And I have thought about this a lot when thinking about this podcast, and I can't remember like the seatbelt alarm going off because I wouldn't have been able to drive with that. That would have driven me crazy. So it must have been literally just before we crashed, because I don't see any other way that he could have gone through the windscreen. And he had a broken nose and he needed a few stitches in his leg from it being cut open. And the other people we went into, I think, were taken to the hospital and checked over, and they tried to sue me later on, but I guess that's not first episode content. I think I have managed to find a lot of gratitude in things since I had the accident. Like, I really wish that I didn't have to go through the accident to have as much gratitude as I do, but I always felt very thankful that I was the one that had sustained the injuries that I had. It wasn't roles reversed. I never once wished that it wasn't me in the situation, because I knew that at least then it was down to me to deal with it. And I do not think that I could have dealt with the guilt if it had been my ex that was in the situation that I was in, even if there was nothing that I could have done to stop it from happening. I remember lying in the stretcher in the middle of the road, and my ex had got me a massive teddy for passing my driving test, which lived in the back seat of my car, and he would keep me company when I was going to and from work myself. And I said to one of the medics, could you please get me that teddy out the back of the car? Just, I needed some comfort. And whilst this was happening, they had informed me that my emergency contact was a family member that I had a very strained relationship with. And I remember crying and begging them not to call who they had, and I was like, I don't know what my dad's mobile number is at the moment, but phone this office, this is where he works, this is where he'll be, please phone there. I was then taken into the helicopter, and I really do not like flying at the best of times, never mind strapped into a stretcher in a helicopter for the first time with broken bones. And I remember, I want to say all these people, there must have only been like 3 or 4 people in the back with me, maybe 2, I don't know. But I just remember with them, their big headphones, and I was lying, just screaming my head off, thinking, why are you not doing anything to help me? Like, I am so scared right now. Why are you not doing anything? And looking back on it now, they were doing all that they could do in that situation, and all they could do was get me to the hospital and get me help. I remember getting to the helipad and getting taken off the helicopter and having to go down in the lift. I think it was into A&E, and having nurses speak to me, but I don't know what they were saying, and it was all very bright, just kind of as you would expect a hospital to be. But I also don't know if that was me kind of just being like, okay, I'm out, I'm done. The next thing I remember, I am being taken through high dependency with my big massive teddy that I rescued out the car. Well, that one of the medics rescued out the car for me. I was in no fit state to be doing any rescuing. I was the damsel in that situation. And I had just undergone major surgery. I got to see my family who had been in the hospital all day waiting for me. And when my dad was called, they were initially told that my injuries were life-threatening. And at some point through my surgery, they were told that they were no longer life-threatening, but they were life-changing. I think for perspective of how long they had been waiting, I had my accident around about 10 o'clock. I think I got to the hospital about 12, and I was probably back in high dependency about 1:30, 2 in the morning the next day. I asked my brother Ryan if he had been to vote because there was an election on that day. That was what I was going to do. After I had dropped my ex off, I was going back home to vote and put my washing away and then go to work. So I asked Ryan if he had been to vote, and he said, "No, I've been here all day waiting for you." And then I had asked if my work had been contacted because I had just got my dream job of being a mental health nurse, and I really didn't want to have let them down, even though I was just lying in a bed full of morphine after breaking both my legs and nearly dying. And then I asked my dad if he was going on holiday 2 days later, which obviously he wasn't because of what had just happened. But I was like, no, don't not go because of me. Like, Becca Hen, you just nearly died. Like, let people care for you. So the major surgery that I had was to stabilise the bones in my leg, and I had what resembled scaffolding on both of my legs. And I was in high dependency for about a week because I couldn't really move. I was needing 3 or 4 members of staff to roll me with also having gas and air whilst and a morphine pump because I was in so much pain. And a lot of this time, because of the pain medication, is very blurry, and a lot of the parts of it have been filled in by other people and trying to piece together what I remember. And I also requested my medical notes to kind of get me a different perspective on it, which has helped. And I got my x-rays as well, which I haven't actually looked at, but after I kind of look at them, I'll maybe do a podcast on that because I think it is very interesting to see my bone healing to bone chop. I have always really struggled with my mental health, and throughout, like in the aftermath of my accident, I lost quite a lot of the connections that I had with people, and that was really hard. But the people that showed up for me and have stuck with me through the journey, the support that I've had from my family, it made me realise how loved and how cared about I really was, because for years I never thought that was possible. I think I have been involved in mental health services for 10 plus years, and it is it has always just felt as if I was lesser of a person because of my mental health, and that I was difficult and people wouldn't want to love me and people didn't want to care about me. But then people showed up for me, and I think it was a big turning point for me realising like how loved and how cared about I really, really am. There is always a way, I think, that I managed to put a positive spin on things, but if I am being realistic about it, I really, 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 really struggled initially. I couldn't understand why this was happening to me. I couldn't understand why I was having to go through this, why I couldn't have just died. I remember having conversations with my dad and saying, I wish I wasn't here. I wish I didn't make it. I wish I didn't have to go through that. I remember lying in the hospital room and looking round and seeing all of the things that if I could just get out of bed that I could potentially end my life with. And being a mental health professional, I knew that I had just experienced something highly traumatic and that I was going to need mental health support. However, 3 years later, and I have still not had any mental health support, no matter how much I have been asking for it, because it has always been, oh, it is a physical issue, come back when your leg's better, oh, your leg's amputated now, well, you were fine with the amputation. And so much has happened in the last 3 years that I don't even know where to start. I have managed to get through so much of it with the tools that I have learned over the span of my life, but there is only so much I can do without support, and it is so infuriating to have to beg for help, to have to say, I am worthy of help, for somebody to tell you, oh, well, you're not actually traumatised enough to get trauma therapy. How do you decide how traumatised somebody is? That really doesn't make sense to me in my brain. Anyway, I have got sidetracked, so we're going back to 5 days after the crash. I had my second surgery, which was to put a lovely plate in my collarbone, a lovely plate in my collarbone, and I had 2 plates inserted in my left leg, one above my knee and one below my knee. I'm pretty sure they had said when I had crashed, my surgeon told me that my right leg was horrifically broken and my left leg was horribly broken. So horrifically broken obviously being the worst of the two. That was just splintered in a lot of places. And in my left leg, my knee was basically floating, like it wasn't really attached to anything. After this surgery, I was moved out of high dependency to a ward setting, and it was a horrible experience, to say the least. I didn't know what ward I was going to. I was still very hazy from the anaesthetic from the surgery. I got up and I got taken into this room, and somebody had come in and I had asked them to help me find my phone, and she had said, well, sorry, I'm actually going off my shift soon, so somebody will be in to help you soon. And I was getting increasingly more anxious, started having a panic attack. I could hear my phone ringing, but I couldn't get to it because I didn't know where it was. I couldn't move, and I managed to get my iPad, and I think I called my dad on Messenger, and I was really upset. And that was just kind of the start of the negative experience of that night, because I think it got to maybe midnight and I had realised the line that I had for my morphine pump was starting to sting every time I was pressing the button. So I pressed my buzzer for one of the members of staff to come, and I had said, look, this is really hurting me. Would you potentially be able to get a nurse to flush it for me? And they said, yep, that's totally fine. Somebody should be round soon. I think an hour and a half later, still nobody had been round, so I pressed the buzzer, and again, oh, sorry, I'll go and get somebody for you. And when the nurse came in, she was just horrible. Like, she basically told me, well, if your line's not working, then it'll just have to be removed and you won't be able to have another one put in. And I was like, I literally nearly died 5 days ago, and I'm like 3 hours post-surgery. I've been doped up on morphine for the last 5 days. You can't just take that away. Like, it's not my fault that the line isn't working properly. So she was like, okay, well, I'll do it for you then. And I'm like, that is all I was asking. Like, I'm not trying to be a nuisance here. So she goes away and gets the syringe and flushes it. And it actually isn't hurting me anymore. It took about 4 hours for them to finally flush it so I could get my medication without being in pain, because I don't even know why. I can't even think of a reason other than they just thought I was being difficult. And that was very much reflected the next morning when the senior charge nurse came in and told me, look, I know you have a nursing degree, but these nurses know what they're doing, so just let them do their job. And I'm like, I'm really not trying to be difficult. I can empathise with the fact that you're swamped, you've not got enough staff, you've not got enough people, there's buzzers going off here, there and everywhere. I can really empathise and understand that, which is why I tried so hard not to be a nuisance patient to then still get made to feel like one. It was horrible. Thankfully, I ended up getting moved to a different ward, and I had my third surgery on Christmas Eve 2019, where I got fitted with my full length ilizarov frame. So we went through what they were going to do, the complications, all of the kind of general things that they tend to do before going for surgery. And I was taken down to like recovery, where you wait before you go in for your operation. And I remember being so anxious and crying, and that was a lot of the feelings before I was going for surgeries initially, was that I was just absolutely terrified. I didn't know what was going to happen. I was going to have to be put to sleep, and what if something happens, and what if something goes wrong, and I would be having panic attacks before going for surgeries. And it was just so difficult initially to fight through that, to not give up and say, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to live. I don't want to be here. So it was a big fight before any operation. But I was put to sleep, and when I woke up, I had my ilizarov frame spanning from my ankle up to probably about the middle of my thigh, my first frame. And for those of you that are watching on YouTube, I will put a picture of what my frame looked like. And for audio listeners, an ilizarov frame is a circular fixator. So it is built with circular rings round the leg, and then the rings have pins which are attached to the bone inside of your leg. And then there's like struts which hold the rings in place and account for the body weight that you are able to put through the frame. And the pins that are holding the bones in place, this is so that they heal in the correct alignment. Frames are commonly used to treat very complex fractures that cannot be healed with nails, pins, screws, having a cast on. ilizarov frames are also used they can turn the legs back into a straight position for people like that have got bowed legs, deformities like that. And they can also be used to help extend leg length. So I wouldn't really recommend it if you are somebody who is a short king and wants to add a few more inches to your height. That's not a good way to do it, because it is bloody painful, and I would never I would never openly choose to just get an ilizarov frame for the fun of lengthening my leg, but it can be used to grow bone because our bodies are absolutely magnificent. And when you create, so you turn the bolts on the frame and it moves your bone apart, and then your body goes, okay, there's a space there, I'm going to grow new bone in that space. And I think that is absolutely wild and incredible at the same time. The healing times for ilizarov frames really do vary. It depends on why you have a frame, what your fracture was like, what your surgeon knows. They know best most of the time. However, if you are on your frame journey, if you're quite a while on, you will know very well that you take the timescales with a pinch of salt, because I have seen people have frames for 3 months, 6 months, up to, I think I was 32 months by the time I got my leg amputated. And initially I was told 12 to 18. And when I was told that, I said to everybody, it's going to be 18, it's not going to be the 12 months. And my bone was healed 7 months after my accident. However, it wasn't meant to be, clearly. But it just shows you, it depends what your body's capability is for healing. Sometimes multivitamins help. Walking and putting weight through the frame helps to stimulate bone growth. However, I am going to go into some more tips in the next episode. Anyway, so now I have told you a little about ilizarov frames, I'm going to bring it back to the initial experience and keep me on the right track. So when I was fitted with my frame, I had a very morphine heavy Christmas in 2019. However, I have never really been a Christmas person, and I think that kind of really brought the importance of what Christmas is about to me, and it is about spending time with the people that you love. I mean, I had a lot of morphine, I was pretty out of it, and thankfully my dad and my stepmom brought me up a wee microwave Christmas dinner, but it's not the same as having the big fancy dinner. But it really wasn't about that, just having my family around me. It's such a hard time in my life. That was the most important thing to me, and it is something that I hold very, very dear, like that experience, that memory. So for me to get out of bed or get moved about in any way, I was having to be hoisted by about 5 members of staff so that they could hold both my legs and also operate the hoist. And it wasn't a first experience in a hoist for me, because with being a nurse and also working in care homes and home care, I did quite a few moving and handling courses, and I always seemed to be the volunteer or participant that would have to get hoisted, and I hated it being able-bodied, and I can understand why people detest being hoisted so much. It is such a pain, and it was so anxiety inducing to make sure that people were holding things in the right place and moving at the right time so I wasn't going to be in agony. And it was so hard, from being somebody who is so fiercely independent to having to have 5 people help you do one thing. 3 days after I had my surgery, I was able to stand up for the first time in 2 weeks. I had a massive machine holding me up, but I managed to stand. And I think it was when I was still in high dependency, I was told that I probably wouldn't walk for 6 months. And hearing that news after being on your feet for 12 to 14 hours a day, doing shift work, being at the gym, on the treadmill, out hill walking weeks beforehand to being told that you might not walk for 6 months, that was so hard to bear. However, with me standing up 2 days after having that surgery, so the 27th of December 2019, I managed to take my first steps on the 31st of December, or the 30th of December, one of them. It was very close to New Year, but I managed to do it, and I didn't think that was going to be possible. And that kind of set the theme for what has been a constant throughout my recovery journey. Is a lot of the times when I do things, I don't think that I'm going to be able to do it. And I get very anxious about not being able to do it, because I have this perfectionist mindset where I think even if there's something new that I'm trying, I need to get it perfect first time. And nobody is like that, because humans are messy. We are not perfect people, and it takes time to learn sometimes, especially relearning how to walk. With me walking, I was using the big machine that had to hold me up, and I carried on using that machine for maybe 2 weeks, or maybe a week. I think it was maybe 2 weeks. A week feels really too short to say that. And then I transitioned into walking with a Zimmer frame, which initially I thought, geez, I feel really old right now. I've only ever really seen old people using Zimmer frames, and that's where I can catch myself out on like internalized ableism. Like, it's not just old people that require mobility aids. Other people do as well. It's not just one section. However, back to the point, after I had been this is all over the place. I'm so sorry. It's jumping back and forward and here and there. After I had kind of been up and done that first walk, I had sat down in the chair that was in the hospital room, and this was a big thing, because I hadn't had to get up from somewhere that wasn't height adjustable yet. And when it came to me getting up, I really thought I was going to end up having to be hoisted, which I didn't want to happen. I wanted to be able to do it. But every time I would get myself part of the way up, and then I would say, I can't do this. Start really freaking out and panicking. And then I did it. And I think that is one of the main things that I could say, that if you are struggling with being scared to do things, do it anyway. Be scared and do it anyway, because you're never going to know if you don't try. And failure's not always a bad thing. I had a conversation with my surgeon at the start of January where I was told that it was probably going to be another 10 weeks that I was in hospital, because I had to go through the process of learning how to walk and being safe enough to be at home. And the frame that I had initially was basically like a frame on the bottom of my leg and a frame on my thigh, and then it was connected at the knee. So they were planning to do another surgery where they would disconnect the rings at my knee, and that would then give me a bit more room to move my knee, and mean that it wasn't going to be as hard when the frame came off for me to get that flexion back. At this meeting with my surgeon, we also discussed the severity of my injuries, and he had told me that if I hadn't been airlifted and brought to the hospital that I was in, then I would have probably lost my leg there and then. And there was a lot of times through the 2.5 years that I had my frame on that I really thought maybe just having my leg amputated straight away would have been the better thing. However, looking back now, I think it would have been a lot more difficult to wake up initially and only have one leg than to wake up and have the scaffolding that I had on my legs and know that there was a chance. I was told that it was looking likely that my full recovery time would be 5 years, which, to be honest, being in year 3 and being at the point that I'm at and starting to get my life back, that was probably a pretty good estimate. After about a month, I was moved hospital to the nearest hospital, my local hospital, and I think with the experiences that I had in the hospital that I was in initially, although they could provide the care that was needed to save my leg, the patient care was lacking, to say the least. And when I was moved to this other local hospital, I saw such a massive improvement. And there was a lot of times when I was in the first hospital that I knew things weren't right because I kept on thinking I would never treat a patient this way. And there was an instance where I had pressed my buzzer because I needed to go to the toilet and nobody came for 45 minutes. So by the time somebody had came, I had soiled myself, and the nursing assistant that came in, I said that I needed help, and one of the first things she said to me was, well, can't you clean it yourself? Like, if I could clean it myself, I wouldn't be asking for you to help me. I have 2 broken legs. How do you really expect me to clean it myself? So she gave me a wipe and I thought that was fine, but I had a catheter in at this point because I wasn't able to actually get up and go to the toilet. I was having to use bedpans, and it was feeling uncomfortable. So I took a bit of tissue paper and I wiped, and I was still soiled. So I pressed my buzzer again, and whilst I was waiting for them to come, I realised that there was also shit on the bed sheet. So she came back in and I was like, I am still soiled and the bed sheets are dirty. Can you please get something else because I don't want to lie like this, and can you clean me properly? And again, it was just like huffing and puffing, and it's like, this is your job. And it really upset me because I was already embarrassed enough about having an accident, and to be made to feel guilty about something that I couldn't help because of the time that it took them to come, it was just a horrible feeling. Whereas in this other hospital, there was always not too much that you could ask for, and they made me feel very welcome. And although they were an orthopaedic ward, they didn't really have the experience of the frames, so they listened to the things that I had learned whilst I had been in the other hospital, and they kind of took that on board. And it really felt like what your care should be. It was collaborative, and in the other hospital, it didn't feel like it was. The next few months was a lot about controlling my pain without being on opioids. I was taken off the morphine pump before I was moved hospital. I was then put on to long-acting oxycodone, which was reduced over a period of time until I only needed to be taking dihydrocodone, which, when it comes to medications, take what works for you. Don't try to be a hero by being in pain, because it's not going to do you any favours. And even now, I'm still on oxycodone, but I'm trying to get off of it because I don't want to be on the medication. But if I need to be on it to not be in pain, then I would rather take it than live my life in pain. I also was working a lot on transitioning from walking with a Zimmer frame to walking with crutches, and getting up and down like small inclines if I was to go out anywhere, managing to do steps and stairs because I had 2 steps outside the front door of my house. And there was a lot of work with the OTs to try and find me a suitable commode, because how far the frame went up my leg. I wasn't able to sit on a normal toilet seat. I wasn't able to sit on a raised seat because the frame would just slide off of it. I was trying to have towels underneath my frame while sitting on the commode, and every time we tried something new, I had a panic attack because I just thought, I'm going to end up on the floor. And I know the staff wouldn't have let me end up on the floor, but I remember always being told if somebody's falling, you let them fall. And I just didn't want that to happen. I was so worried about doing more damage to myself. My mental health really took a massive beating. I was so filled with anxiety and anger and depression and all of the feelings of grief that I didn't know how to deal with from everything that I had lost the opportunity that I was going to be able to do. And I would sit in my single room with the lights off and the curtains closed, and sometimes I wouldn't be able to engage in physio because I didn't even want to get out of bed. I didn't want to be awake. I didn't want to be alive, never mind try and do physio. And because of this, a psychologist eventually came to see me, who in my medical notes wrote that I was dealing with the situation how you would expect somebody to be dealing with it, and that it was a physical issue, not a mental health issue. And that is a big thing that angers me because I don't know how you expect somebody to be reacting in that situation, that they've just got their dream job and then been told that they're not going to walk for 6 months. There's a potential that they could be disabled. There's a potential that they could still lose their leg. There was zero input apart from, we have some mental health nurses that we can send up to the ward when they've got a free minute. And that made me feel like a burden on the services because I wasn't on their caseload. It was their free time where they could be doing the paperwork that they need to catch up on, yet they're having to come up and see me. And then I felt like I couldn't really engage because I wasn't really going to get the help anyway, because I was told that this isn't a mental health issue. I was totally invalidated in what I was going through. I think I also really struggled to find a balance between not doing anything and doing too much. I very much struggle with my pain tolerance because when I'm doing exercise, most of the time I don't get sore or tired really when I was doing it. And then it would get to at night and I was having to be given injections of morphine because I was in absolute agony. And it was really, really hard to get a kind of management on pain and what is too much, how much is pushing myself too far. And I just wanted to go home. I just wanted to be with my cat Simba, who I missed him the most when I was in hospital. One of my pals had brought up a pillow with like his face printed on it. I would FaceTime my dad so that I could see him. I felt so horrible because I had left and I just didn't come back, and I didn't want him to think that I had abandoned him. And so one of the conditions for me going home was that if I wanted to live myself, I had to have carer support, which initially I was extremely resistant of because, like I have mentioned, I am a fiercely independent person, and I had literally just stopped working in home care. I was 22 years old. I didn't want carers coming into my house. I wanted to be able to do it on my own. However, that wasn't an option. It was either get carers or go live with my dad. And my dad stays in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't really want family members looking after me. If anything, I would prefer strangers looking after me to family members, but I would definitely have preferred to have been able to do it on my own, but that wasn't an option. I also had to get a community alarm, which I am going to go into more detail about next week. And I was a bit worried about carers coming in because I didn't want them to come in from the company that I used to work for. But I was told that that was a possibility. Like they didn't have to send in the company that I used to work for. And it really was a struggle to kind of say, okay, I'll get this help. I'll have these safety precautions in place. And I really needed it. And I still needed it up until about 4 months ago, until I really got my independence back. I wouldn't have got through the last 3 years if it hadn't been from the support that I had from carers. So having these conversations, talking about going home, I was getting really excited because I could finally see the end of my hospital stay in sight. However, I started having some issues when I was getting up and going into my wheelchair, and it was like a clunking sound when I was standing up and sitting down, and it was starting to get increasingly more sore. So I had a clinic appointment scheduled to go and see my surgeon, which my dad came and met me for, which I was glad that he was there, because when I went into the room to speak to the surgeon, he had said that like the scans were looking all right, and I had said about the pain and the clunking, and he had said, okay, well, can I press down on your leg? And I was like, no. And he was like, well, I need to press down on your leg to see what the problem is. So can I do it? And reluctantly, I was like, okay, you can do it. And it was fucking sore. It was agony. And it just threw me into a panic attack. I very rudely called him a C word, which I still can't believe that I did that. And I think my dad said that it sounded like an animal squealing that had been hurt. It was very painful, but doing that, he had figured out that one of the pins had came loose in my bone, and that clunking noise that I was hearing was the pin kind of going in and out of my bone. So I was scheduled for surgery number 4, which during this surgery, they kind of tied it together with what I was saying earlier about detaching the frame. So they took out the pin that was giving me bother, put a new one in, and then they loosened the frame at my knee. And this surgery felt like such a massive setback for all of the work that I had done for the last 2 months, because before the surgery, I was at a point where I was able to be getting out of bed and go and get a wash without having to get help from members of staff. I was able to get up and walking with my crutches. And then after I had this surgery, I couldn't even stand up. The physios had come in and I couldn't even get out of bed because of how unstable my knee felt. And this was back at the hospital that my surgeon was based at, that I had already had problems. And on call surgeon had come in and said to me, okay, well, I don't see why you're in hospital. You can just go home. And I was like, I am not going home. Like, if I'm going anywhere, I'm going back to that other hospital. And he was like, well, why? I was like, well, I haven't been home in 2 months. My house hasn't been safety checked to make sure that it's suitable. I don't have any of the equipment I need. And the physio has just been in and I can't even stand up. So how do you expect me to be going home? And he was like, oh, okay, then, yeah, I'll get it set up for you to get transferred back to the other hospital. It took me about a week after that surgery to settle, readjust, basically relearn how to start walking again, go back to using the Zimmer frame and then to the crutches. And I was also in instead of having a single room, I was in a bedded dorm, so I wasn't really sleeping the best, and it was so much, and it was just really getting to the point where after I was confident walking with my crutches, I just wanted to go home. I wanted to see what life was going to be like outside of the hospital. And this is kind of nearing the end of my 3-month stay in hospital. Thank you very much for joining me and listening to the first episode of the Cripple Chronicles. On next week's episode, I am going to be talking about what it was like for me getting home and adjusting, the supports that I had in place, and some things that I learned and some tips to help other people who might be on their frame journey. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe and leave me a wee comment about what you enjoyed about this episode or what your thoughts were, because I would love to hear from you. As well as on all listening platforms, please rate and review. If you want to give me maybe 5 stars, I would be very grateful, but I would rather you would be honest. If there are things that you think I could do better or that you didn't like, please tell me, because I'm always open to learning. And follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Cripple Chronicles Pod. And again, finally, if you would like me to talk about anything, then email cripplecchroniclespod@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. Bye!